we have so much data, so much evidence that shows us when we take care of the human beings inside of our organization, the organization does better as a business. And yet, despite all of that data, we still see all of these cuts to, assistance programs, to, you know, now with the advent of AI, the whole idea is okay, great. Now AI can help us get more done faster.
What does it take to build a company that puts people before short term gains? In this episode of Be Your Own Boss, David Gamble talks with leadership consultant and startup founder Carissa Karban about breaking out of corporate contradictions, leading with emotional intelligence, and creating organizations grounded in trust, accountability, and long term thinking. They explore burnout culture, the pressure to constantly prove value, and why the best decisions often come from the people closest to the work. Carissa also shares how her own career pivot led her from engineering and big tech to building a values driven AI entertainment studio. Let's get into it. Okay, welcome everybody to another installment of Be Your Own Boss. I'm your host, David Gambill, where we discuss a person's life and career and what got them to this point. Today, our guest today is Carissa Karban. Greetings and welcome. And please introduce yourself to the audience and share your backstory.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here. Yeah, I'm Carissa. I like to say I'm a multi-potentialite. I've had a varied path across career and personal life. My background started in engineering, got my start as a materials engineer back in the day, and then switched fields. I started working at Cisco, went into network engineering. And while I was at Cisco, really learned, there are a lot of things that are very interesting about engineering, but the things that I was gravitating towards in my free time and the things I was really curious about were really around business and leadership. So over the course of almost a decade at Cisco, I went through business operations, training and enablement, customer success, and really found a passion for leadership. So went back and got a second master's in leadership and org development, and then really focus on how do we create better leaders? How is it that we really learn the shortcomings between the cognitive knowledge that we're taught about how to lead and what really gets in the way of us embodying those leadership values that we really care about? So I left Cisco, became a leadership consultant for a couple of years at a boutique consulting firm, and then actually kind of set out on my own path. I took a sabbatical for about 6 months, traveled around the world, and then became a full time founder and entrepreneur of an AI startup. So relocated here to Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and now I'm, fundraising, doing all the fun things that come with startup life.
Yeah, let's kind of go back to your engineering days. So you have materials engineering. How much did you use at Cisco?
Not too much, actually, not much. I would say rather than the content, what I really used at Cisco was the context. I love the engineering mindset of curiosity of, well, how could this be better? How could we adapt this? So I really used more of the mindset that I learned through engineering as opposed to the nuts and bolts of how materials work. It did come in handy a little bit as I was studying, fiber optic cables and learning a little bit about how the backbone of the
Materials,
internet
right?
works.
Right.
But yeah, didn't use too much of my materials background.
So did you see, and you mentioned about going into leadership. Did you see that? Was it a fast turnaround from, kind of doing the engineering pseudo? What triggered you to say, haha, leadership is either A, critical, or B, non-existent to where I'm doing, or both?
It's a good question, David. I think I had, I'll say a couple of good bad examples, I'll say, of leadership. Early on in my career, kind of new to the corporate scene, I saw just how critical leadership was because we would have this one leader who would tell a team of 20 the same message, and it would leave many of us feeling frustrated or not seen or not valued. And so I thought, I'm such a why person. That's what got me inspired to go into materials in the first place. Why is it that things behave the way that they do? So for me, it was really a thread that I started to pull on slowly to ask those questions of, well, why is it that leadership is so critical? Why is it so important? Why does it have such a huge impact on not only the outcomes in the business, but also the lived experience of employees inside the organization? So
Right.
it wasn't
Well,
a quick turnaround at all.
right. Oh, well, I mean, even my career, I had good persons I wanted to work for, and I had very awful people that just didn't know how to work with people.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's kind of like I just didn't see a continuation because of, how things turn around. Once 18 months to 2 years, you see a new person or you move on to your next project. Did you feel like you didn't have a continuation, that the good leaders didn't stick around? Did that ever occur in your journey?
Yeah, I would say it definitely occurred, especially at top leadership levels. I think it was less so as I started my career, and then that pace started to pick up a lot more. Found that as leaders would leave, new leaders would come in, and then they would bring all of their, for lack of a better term, their cronies with them and really influence the culture and shape it according to what they wanted and their values. So I started to see a lot of turnover, of the good and the bad, I'll say. But it definitely created a sense of uncertainty, a sense of, okay, well, how do I really get recognized? Because with the changes in leadership, it wasn't just that I was losing the context of the relationship with that particular person, but it was almost like a pendulum swinging. Today we value this, and then that person leaves, and now we value something completely different. And so it was kind of this organizational whiplash of trying to figure out, especially in the era of mass layoffs becoming normalized rather than it being something that companies try to avoid. It became sort of this proactive lever that I saw leaders pulling to say, okay, well, things are changing now, so we'll just lay off a bunch of people, we'll restructure, we'll shuffle things around. And I think part of the issue in not seeing those outcomes or the results that we set out to see is because we're changing things so rapidly and so frequently. So it makes it hard to really see a project through. I can't tell you how many projects I've been on where, a third or halfway through, or even 80% of the way through, we find out there's been a reprioritization, budget reallocation, whatever it is. Now we have to scrap all of that and start something new. So it was a lot of starts and stops for sure.
Do you think it was because this is I won't mention names of companies, but I did see the playbook that they were playing in real time, that a new person would come in, and beyond just the cronies or the people that the tag-alongs, I call them, that they brought in, is that they were being taught by upper leadership of doing, if you can't, and this was almost like a mantra, is that if you stick too long in one particular position, and 2 years was kind of like the cutoff, you would not see any movement and going up in the ladder.
Mm,
That was the mantra being given down to it was basically the middle management, right? The folks who are actually dictating everything. So they were being ordered to go from one project to the next every 2 years. If they stagnated in any position longer than that, their career was over. And they were told that in
mm,
leadership classes. So
mm.
do you see that? Did you see that kind of the mindset that was going on at the
You
time?
know, I think there was some of that, and I honestly think a lot of it was it's this sort of narrative where you can't win no matter what you do. As someone who bounced around to roles every couple of years following my interests, my passions, my desires as they came up, I used to run into the issue on the opposite side of the spectrum where, you know, to your point, it's like there would be an advertisement of a position where they want people who have diverse experience across the
Yeah,
organization,
right,
but they also want that depth. And so it was kind of like, oh, we want a decade of experience over here. We want 8 to 10 years of experience over here. And I said, well, this is all great, but I'm not 120 years old. Like, how am I supposed to bounce around and have cross functional expertise and
right.
the depth that you're looking for? So a lot of it felt like kind of just moving the goalpost, right? Whatever it is that you have done, it's not good enough for these reasons. And then you bring someone in who's done the opposite. Well, now it's not good enough for these reasons. And so I think a lot of it was kind of this hyper independent culture that we tend to work in, thinking that it's me, it's my career, I need to look out for myself. And so I need to go hop around instead of really building something that is community driven or more sustainable. So I
Right.
think a lot of us are caught in kind of that rock and that hard place.
Well, I've seen the opposite of that as particular where managers would protect those that are getting them the efficiency.
Mm,
And so they'd lock those folks in. And if they, because in the end, the manager kind of had some pull or who they took, and they gave up, the quote unquote underperformers to these new positions. And so I saw a lot of that. I mean,
mhm,
it was in positions that I could say, well, he's not moving because he's too in line with that manager. And a lot of the first level managers never moved, right?
mm,
They, they, I think their average was 4 to 5 years. So they would keep the people because their performance was based on the people they had. So there was some reluctancy to give those high performers, different positions if because it at the in the end would cost them, performance because they're based on their people. So there's this give and yin and yang on that. So with that, I mean, all that. So what when you got to that point where it kind of broke the string, what
mm.
was kind of that turning point that caused the I just need to get out of this Ferris wheel?
Yeah, it's great questions, because I think for me it was really that contradiction that I experienced. And we're kind of speaking to it here where it's okay, we want this one thing, but you do that one thing. No, that's not quite it. That's not what we wanted. And for me, something I encountered time and time again was this idea of we want disruptive innovation. We really want people challenging the status quo. But then as soon as I would ask a hard question or I'd bring something disruptive, it was, oh, no, 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 it can't be that disruptive. So it's trying to find that sweet spot of okay, we want you to be better than everybody else, but within this framework, within this box of what makes us feel safe. And so for me, it was really that contradiction where I was I felt very aligned in my heart to say I'm raising these questions because I want to make us better as an organization, but I constantly keep hitting walls. And as a consultant, I was going into client sites, working with big tech companies, facilitating these multi day leadership transformational experiences. And yet, at the firm that I was working with, we weren't necessarily embodying those things that we were teaching our clients. So I was running into the same thing at different large corporations as well as small firms where it was this idea of you can't really win. And so I said, I really am passionate about doing things drastically different, creating organizations where we truly empower human beings. It's not just about profit and the bottom line. It's not just about us saving face as individuals. It's really about us creating a community and an ecosystem that lifts everybody up who's part of it. I think today, and especially the corporate culture, the hierarchical nature of that system creates this idea that it's only the people at the top who truly benefit, who are truly protected or cared for. And I actually think that's even a fallacy. I think in today's corporate culture, everybody's expendable, right? We oust CEOs and the C suite easily these days. And so I think the problem was I didn't feel safe anywhere I went. And so I said, I'm going to try to do something different. I'm going to build an organization that I really believe in.
And so are you doing that now? And how's that working out? Is it more flat? I mean, I heard the word term flat structure, and
Sure.
sometimes that's kind of I wouldn't say oxymoron, but it's kind of it still has to have. I mean, I as a personal statement is kind of do you always make decisions by committee, right? Type of thing. And how do you tread that water?
That is a fantastic question. I really love that because I think oftentimes we can kind of get stuck in this polarization of like, okay, it's hierarchy, it's top down, or it's completely flat. Everybody has an equal say. And I would say the blend that we're playing with is kind of a mix where it's more about who has the best awareness and proximity to the problem that we're solving. These are the voices that need to be included. So even as co-founder, there are technical decisions that my co-founder, who's the CEO of the company, he makes those decisions with our dev team and he informs me. But even though I'm a co-founder, I don't necessarily need to be part of all of those decisions because I'm not informed. I don't come from a place to really be able to drive that decision forward. And so for us, it's really about kind of that span of control or sphere of influence, whatever corporate lingo we want to use to describe it. It's who is closest, and I think something that's really different in how we approach things is recognizing that the people who are closest to the problem, the boots on the ground, if you
Yeah.
will,
Yeah.
they have incredibly valuable experience. They're seeing things that people who are higher up in the organization or at different levels of leadership would never see. So it's really this blend rather than, I would say, rather than stroking egos to say, okay, you're going to be involved in this so that we can keep you happy. There's a lot of accountability and there's a lot of transparency in saying, I'm going to humble myself and say, I don't have the information to make this decision. I can certainly do my best. I can tell you based on my experience, here's what I think could be done. But there's a lot of humility, a lot of checking our ego at the door to say who actually can make the best decision. And so my co-founder and I are really the visionaries, the one driving the direction of the company. So when it comes to certain decisions around vision and direction, he and I sometimes make those decisions without, surveying the committee or getting everybody's voice contributing. But then there are other decisions that make more sense to involve our ops lead or other parts of the team. So it's really looking at who has the best expertise to drive this forward.
Yeah. Well, my 2 entries into that as far as organization is either functional or shared IPTs. Program based where you take functionals and they're all shared between the different, I guess, product teams, if you want to call it that. And then, but program manager has the money. And and I could tell you over the life of my career, I always follow the money because the person that
Mhm.
has the purse strings usually has the final say of what gets done.
Fair.
Because implementing new tools, implementing new IT into the engineering or into the product, whether it be materials, purchasing, contracts, whatever that process is. And if somebody wants to do something that's more radical and there's not enough momentum behind it, the program manager, or the other person, the director of program management for that particular product, more or less gets the final say in some instances because it has to be presented to them, and then they have to tell them, okay, I'm going to spend X number of dollars. I'm getting X benefit from it, right? Value. This is kind of like the value system. Is that something that you've been thinking about as far as it's one thing to do something, and there's another thing is, am I getting to get the big bang for the buck for what I'm going to do next? As
Yeah,
a
absolutely. I think the way we think about it is also looking at incentive structures. Many of kind of the corporate culture today, especially for public companies, where we're expected to report out to shareholders, and the priority is truly short term gains, right? Because a lot of shareholders honestly don't care too much about the longevity of the company. Are they accomplishing their mission? There's stuff, and maybe this is a broad generalization, so I'm open to being wrong here, but the culture around shareholders is this expectation of short-term returns. Every single quarter we need to cut costs, we need to increase profits, we need to show growth. And what we do is we really take those incentives and we say, well, why is that, right? I told you I'm a why person. Why is it that we are expected to grow every single quarter? So we really challenge a lot of those sort of metrics or measurements that we've been conditioned to think like this is how you measure the success of a company. And so when it comes to making those financial decisions, we don't just say, okay, what's going to save us on cost? What's going to make us more profitable next quarter? It's really, is this going to, one, ensure a long term future of our company, which is pretty different for a lot of companies not thinking about the long term. It's really, how do we just create that short term gain, assuming that that will translate to long term gain. But what we find is there are so many decisions that we end up making where we, to use the phrase, sort of cut off our nose to spite our face. Like we're doing these things to cut a corner in the short term, but it actually ends up costing us a lot more in the long term. So we really take more of an approach thinking long term first. And then we look at, okay, yes, this is, money that we could spend today. What is it really going to get us? So we certainly have a lot of those typical conversations around what's the value, what's the return on investment, the ROI that we're expecting, and we do our best to hold the short and long term priorities simultaneously.
Yeah, that's an interesting balancing act because of the pressures.
And a lot of times that comes back to leadership and being able to push back at the stockholders and saying, you know, you got to look at the long game because if you don't look at the long game, then you got a short term company
Exactly.
on the ropes that could be cutting costs, but you could be out of the ring the next year because they misunderstood the markets
And
or
not
they
just the markets, but the people, right? You think about, with layoff culture, you think about with burnout, how many people are we seeing who are completely burned out? We're seeing, so many things like quiet quitting, the great resignation to call back these movements from a
right
few years ago. We have so much data, so much evidence that shows us when we take care of the human beings inside of our organization, the organization does better as a business. And yet, despite all of that data, we still see all of these cuts to assistance programs to, you know, now with the advent of AI, the whole idea is okay, great. Now AI can help us get more done faster. But instead of saying, okay, we're still going to do 40 hours of work, and if you can do that in 20 hours with the assistance of AI, fantastic. Now you have more free time. Now we're just moving the goalposts and saying, well, now you're using AI, so you're expected to get 80 hours of work done in 40 hours. And there's just this constant acceleration and chronic fear dysregulation that's happening. And what we know to be true from evidence is that as humans, we do not do our best work when we're constantly looking over our shoulder, when we're exhausted, when we're burned out, when we're living in chronic fear that our livelihood is on the line. Of course, we can eke out, a little bit more productivity here, a little more creativity there, but fear-based management is a short-term game. It's a very finite game. And so that's what I'm talking about in terms of challenging the status quo, doing things differently, but they're evidence-based. We know that these things work because when you look at organizations that treat their humans well, they usually flourish as businesses as well.
yeah. And do you well, I see the pullback from the COVID and remote work or
Mm.
hybrid work.
Mhm.
And as with a family, kind of going back to you took a sabbatical of 6 months, kind of iterate on that as far as, helping your employees help themselves and make them a better career person and understand that life is life, and if you don't treat it as such, you kinda lose out, right? And so kind of go into that. What led up to your sabbatical and how you want to, as you say, treat your employees at this point.
Mm. Yeah, I think what led to my sabbatical, so my personal life sort of blew up unexpectedly. I went through a divorce and thought, okay, well, this is a perfect opportunity. I like to joke that I'm a professional lemonade maker, when life hands me lemons. I make a fantastic sparkling lemonade. So what ended up happening was, my ex was really much more into the stability, the security of the corporate job, and I'd been wanting to leave corporate for quite some time. And so I said, okay, well, this is my opportunity. So quit my job, sold my house, moved away for out of state, and basically started this 6-month travel sabbatical around the world, checking off bucket list items that I'd wanted to check off for years and years. It was a really transformative experience. It was incredibly beautiful. And the way that I translate that into our organization today is really looking at, we were just talking about the long term success of an organization, and we take that approach to humans as well. For us, it's not, okay, what are you doing just for us as a company? It's what can we do for you as a person? How do we enable you to have more opportunities? How do we help you build the skills that you want that are going to help translate to something down the road, whether that's within our organization or maybe outside. I'm a big fan of if it's no longer a fit here, how do I pave the way? How do I create introductions for you? How do I help empower and lift you up? I'll actually tell a story where I did this really poorly. Those good, bad examples, right? We have these
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah.
I had a team member who got a new offer for a different job. And in that moment, David, I did not handle that situation well because what we know is when people share news with us, if we center ourselves in that news, it takes the focus off of them and whatever they're celebrating or the hard thing that they're bringing forward. So in that particular moment, she came to me and I do my best to empower, to celebrate, to show up in that way. And so the way I showed up was, oh my gosh, like what's going to happen with the organization? This is hard, and while my words said that I was excited and that was true, I also got caught up in what does this mean for the future of the organization? And I kind of jumped straight to, okay, let's plan logistics, let's do some succession planning, let's figure out what this means, coming from a place of good intention because I wanted her to feel like we're going to figure it out and so that we can celebrate you moving on to a new role. But instead, what I did that was really clumsy in that situation was I centered myself and the organization in that instead of keeping the focus on her as a person, celebrating this news, celebrating the excitement that she was, you know, she just got this opportunity to take the next step in her career. And so as a leader, I think about that a lot. I learn from those engagements and those interactions to say, okay, how do I know that I'm going to take the time that I need to do the succession planning, to do the figuring it out behind the scenes, but how do I really focus on the human being first? That's something that we really bring into our organizational kind of ethos.
That is true. So, what what lessons did you learn from that? Is it just kind of separate the two and treat them as individuals, and later on be able to do that? I mean, how do you? It's kind of like walking on a balancing act. You've got to be, you got to take care of them because you just don't know when that boomerang will come back, right? If you treat them well on the way out, they could come back as, as a very seasoned person that could really help out the company you're in. But if they get a, kind of bridges burn type of
Mm,
feeling, you've lost that talent forever,
yeah, yeah,
regardless
that's
of
a
the
that's a
immediate
great
impact,
point.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think the lessons that I took were one, just to keep that focus on the person. But I think the other part too that we don't often talk about when it comes to leadership is that emotional regulation. I have been cultivating emotional regulation and self awareness for quite some time. And yet sometimes it still gets the best of me. I was in a moment where I had other things on my plate and I can look at that and give myself grace as a human being myself to say, okay, I wasn't at my best. I didn't have the capacity that I really needed to be able to see her. It was unexpected news. I thought we were going in a different direction with that conversation. And so first off, I give myself grace. But then the other part that I noticed too is in those moments, if I'm unable to, kind of put my own stuff aside and focus on that person, I think what's actually best in that moment is to call the audible to say, hey, this was really surprising to me. I might need a few minutes to go collect myself, process, and then I'd love to come back and continue having the conversation. I think it's an underrated tool to
Mm,
press the pause button.
right.
Oftentimes, I and I think many around me, we think, okay, I just have to power through. We had, 30 minutes on the calendar. I've got to get through these 30 minutes instead of just saying, gosh, that was actually a lot for me to take in. I would love to be able to show up really fully in celebration of you and your opportunity. And I recognize that I'm not there yet. So if you could just give me a few minutes, maybe we can circle back later today or tomorrow. I think it's really important to not let that linger for a long time, not go a week before you follow up with that person. But I think there's a lot of grace that comes in because as a leader, we get to remember that we're humans too. There's no such thing as perfection. It's really just data, it's learning, it's pivoting, integrating those lessons so that we can show up in more alignment with our values next time.
Yeah, you've got that right. I bet emotions is a difficult thing. It's definitely how we react, and if we feel and it, in your situation, it could be you're going through something, and then I know from myself, control is a problem, right? I tend to think that I can just muster through it, but you're right. Taking a step back, counting to 10, you know, doing some time out and have some thoughts with yourself of and making sure their thoughts or their, grace in wherever they're going, that you give them the time to go process it as well as you, right? Because it's two-sided. And
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
because they just made a big decision, right? So you got to get them kudos for that. You got to give them their I want to say identity or their
Mm,
own life, because you can't be selfish, right? When you start to think that but like you mentioned before, the company, that's being, like you said, selfish, and it's you can't present that when you hear it, right? And it's kind of a lot of times when I've been given bad news, a lot of times I come away with it, and you get to process it, get to process it internally, process it with other folks besides them, and then you come back stronger. And in past instances about either being laid off or about being let go or whatever that very critical situation is, I come back more level headed than the people who let me go. And a lot of times they get comments of, Dave, you're level headed. Why are you doing this? So I just see it as another opportunity, not as a, not as a knock against me. It's a knock against the company of doing something that I thought was undubiously incorrect. But
Mm.
I can't change that, right? You have to face up with it and challenge yourself.
Yeah, I love
So,
that. Control is a big one for me as well. I like to say control the controllables, right? I've spent so much energy trying to control the things that were never mine to control in the first place.
yeah,
So as I humbly recognize how little is actually within my control, and then I focus my energy on those, that's where a lot of things open up, because I think so much of it for me comes down to trust. Trust in myself, trust that whatever is presenting itself, whatever is unfolding is in my highest good and the highest good of the organization, the collective. Because to use that example, if someone doesn't want to be in this organization, then of course it is for everyone's highest good that they move on to a different organization. We want them to find a great fit. And that's where for me so much of the challenging the paradigm also comes down to challenging the scarcity mindset. This belief that, oh, there's not enough to go around, or if this person leaves, I'll never find someone to replace them. And instead really adopting that abundance mindset, recognizing that we have everything that we need, and everything will work out in the end. Maybe it's optimism, call it naivete, whatever it is, from your frame of reference that you want to call it. But there is something really beautiful in creating that trust, that I trust that I can handle whatever comes my way. That's a huge one, the self
yeah.
trust. And then also trust in the collective and what's happening with us and for us.
Well, that's exactly right. It's the because it goes back to when you've actually before when you hired them, there has to be something other than the knowledge that they bring. It has to be, to me, it always has to be the passion, because they may not know what they need to know, but if they have the passion to do the job, they'll learn it.
Yeah,
And a lot of
exactly.
times we stop at the resume, even when we talk with them, when we're just talking to them from the resume, we don't expand on it. And it's kind of like you don't know the human being, and if they're not a good fit, you should be able to see it. But if it's just because of one little thing, right? It's almost like in dating. You know, you see the resume of whether biography or whatever, and
Yeah.
oh, he doesn't have that one check. Why? What does that matter? If they're a good-hearted person that has good value, and they're not, demeaning, or they're willing to hear you out, or they're willing to be open-minded. I mean, those are kind of the values I think of just as, finding a friend. I don't want
Yeah.
somebody who's not gonna think about me. I don't want somebody who's going to demean me.
Mm,
It just goes back to values, like you mentioned before about how do you set up an organization? It's all about values and what values you present, and
yeah.
everything else should just fall out.
I agree. And I think it's a beautiful point you bring up and worth calling out. There's also a difference between the values you claim on your website versus the values that you're actually living every single day. We could say we value humility or checking your ego at the door, but if as a leader I'm not practicing that, I'm not living it, then it becomes, just something, a throwaway phrase.
Well,
In that
how many
example that I mentioned. Yeah, go ahead.
no, no, I was just gonna think of when you were thinking that is, how many press releases are you all using the same words? And you like, how often is that just the marketing guy or the press release guy is just using a copy, but it has no basis and value with the people within the company?
Yeah.
Does that
Yeah, you
really
feel it.
right? And you could feel it by just, hey, this copy is like, you could pull up 5 or 6 or 10 different companies using the same press release on a bad situation every time, and like that doesn't mean anything anymore. It's what you how you react to it. And a
Exactly.
lot of times, too many people stay in the moment too long, and they forget about it because they think that you see that you'll just forget about it, and they can go on doing what they've been doing.
Yep,
There's no
exactly.
challenge to it.
Yep.
So,
True accountability is
it's
absolutely needed.
and true accountability is over time. It's not just
Mhm.
a one-off. And
Absolutely.
so often we tend to drop into that. I mean, AI can do that now, get all these templates together, and then whatever situation, they'll tailor it to that situation, but it may not be the company or the people in the company's actual position on it, right? So
Yeah.
then you go back to authenticity, or is that your true value,
Yeah,
right? How are you presenting
absolutely.
it? Then and that's where the trust breaks down, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and I think, AI is really showing us too that it's not just the words that we're using, right? To your point, it could be a press release, swap it in, swap it out. It's really the energy, it's the values, it's the embodiment behind the words, and I think that's something that I'm optimistic that AI is bringing forward. It's uncomfortable. Oftentimes, these things can be uncomfortable to look at initially, but I think it's really worth shining a light on these issues to say, oh, wait a second, maybe we shouldn't just be saying what we think people want to hear. Maybe we should actually speak from a place of truth, from a place of authenticity, because if David, you and I don't align or agree on something, that's okay. But the sooner we realize that, we use communication to figure out, where is it that you stand, where is it that I stand, and how do we create something together in co-creation, in collaboration, that we can move forward on, instead of doing this dance on eggshells where I don't say the thing because I'm afraid you're going to be upset, or you tell me what you think I want to hear. It just becomes a mess.
Well, yeah, it's kinda like well, I mean, we can go on and on about that, but I'll leave it at this. It's kinda like and I see this happen as well, is like the people are so from a corporation perspective, so attuned to negativity that anything they put out, they're so painstakingly, available to not put out the wrong press release, to put them in a bad light. Rather than admitting their mistake and saying, "We're gonna do that," that's very rare. Saying, "Hey, we made a mistake. We're gonna do this," and then you just have to take on the word for it, but time will tell. And I always say, just like you said, the actions speak louder than words, and just the press release by itself is not enough, right?
Exactly. Yep.
So
Like you said, time will tell.
time will tell. So with that, time as a segue, what's the future for Carissa and your new startup?
Yeah, we're building. I think, like most founders I've met, things happen a little slower than we'd like, or we've run into different challenges, but it's a lot of fun, honestly. Where I'm learning a ton, learning a lot of different things that I've never learned in my career in corporate or consulting. So it's definitely a new venture, and we're really excited because what we're building is, we've essentially embedded our values so deeply into the product that we're building that there's really no way to peel them apart. The product that we're building is really based on kindness and generosity and community and pro-social behavior in community with each other. And so, yeah, we're growing. I said earlier, not growth for the sake of growth. We have targets, reasons that we're growing, but hopefully everyone will have heard of our first title, which is Astra Puffs, very soon, because we're building a video game that is really fun first, but it's an opportunity, a shared world for us to play with AI, to bring our friends, and to explore a world of possibility in this really cozy genre. So we like to say we're an AI native entertainment studio, and our first title is a video game. And so I would say we're looking to grow. We've been doing, we just released our open alpha demo. So anybody who wants to come play the game can come join us. We have open play sessions on Thursdays, or you can reach out and get a link to download it and try it yourself. But we're really looking to get more and more people in the game, getting feedback. That's another topic that we tend to shy away from, especially in corporate, but we very much want feedback. We want co creation, collaboration for building this game as great as it can be.
It's good. Well, put me down. I'd love to see it. I think one thing you probably want to push out there as far as learning. Every game is a learning apparatus
Mm,
that can promote the best values of humanity, and I think that's better than some of the others that have been out there.
mm.
But please let me know. I'll put the link in the comments and the description of the video, and then I appreciate your time, Carissa, and I appreciate you being candid, and I wish you all the best.
Amazing. Thank you so much, David. It's been great to be here and excited to play together.
Thank you, and the audience, stay tuned for next week's podcast. Thanks.
That's it for this episode of Be Your Own Boss. A big thank you to Carissa Karban for sharing her journey from engineering and corporate leadership to building a company centered on trust, generosity, and long term thinking. If this conversation resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Are the values you talk about showing up in how you lead, work, and build with others? Be sure to check out Carissa's work and her upcoming game, Astropuffs, via the links below. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's rethinking what better leadership can look like. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube so you never miss a new conversation. We'd also love to hear from you. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, reach out anytime at info@gnggdesignllc.com. Until next time, keep designing your life your way.